I'm just going to summarize that project very quickly. So there were two parts to my talk: the summary of what happened, and then some lessons learned. So I'll just very briefly summarize that from June 2017 to July 2018, the Spencer Museum partnered with the Commons, which is actually an interdisciplinary partnership of Spencer Museum, Biodiversity Institute, and Hall Center of Humanities to host the National Public Art Project Pledges of Allegiance. And we were hosting it at the University of Kansas. As a part of this project, we flew a series of 11 flags made by artists that address contemporary issues such as immigration, government surveillance, and even the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. The final artwork in the series, entitled Flag 2 by Josephine Meskepper, consisted of abstract representation of the United States divided into two parts and a printed graphic of the American flag. This particular flag generated what I would say a lot of public interest and some outcry, including politicians. It was originally located in front of Spooner Hall, which was an outdoor location on a pole that was erected for that purpose, and we moved it to the Spencer Museum into a learning center where it was constantly being stewarded and shepherded by staff members from both the Commons and the Spencer Museum to foster public engagement, and it was up through the entire run of the exhibition. So that's sort of the summary. So it was a relocation, and I'll just briefly go through what I think the lessons learned were. I actually felt like we ended in a very good place. Working backward, I'd like to just say that I think it's extremely important to keep your eye on the big picture, the long-term gains, the long-term losses when you're in a situation that is so heated. The goal in the end for us was to do justice both to the art and to freedom of expression. And so it was a navigational situation and balancing. We were actually trying to balance the concerns of many stakeholders, both inside and outside the university. So keep your eye on the big picture. Second lesson learned was to try to continue to create a conversation and involve as many people as you can. I credit my entire staff for that, as well as the staff of the Commons. I had two major stewards of this, and that was Joey Orr and Emily Ryan, who really were in there with the art all the time. Plus, I also want to call out my director of communications, Elizabeth Canose, who was incredible. For me, it's always important and this is a third lesson learned, to try to maintain your relationships, no matter how contested or how difficult they become, that becomes one of the goals, I think, as we try to take this conversation into the future. And then, are you hearing me?
Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. And then next to the last, I think leadership during a time like this is actually looks a bit different. And it's what I would consider to be a crisis leadership mode. It was very important to me that there not be fallout to the rest of my staff or a whole host of other people. So I became much more clear about lines of authority in crisis situations. And then finally, I think I don't want to miss the chance to say be bold and try not to allow the controversy and the personal toll to keep you from doing the next bold big thing. And for that, I would say part of what I have been thinking about since this happened was one thing I didn't say lessons learned is to assess the personal controversy fatigue within and beyond your institution, because you get fatigue. And I think that that extends to the people that you report to, the people who are working the project, and even to those of us who are actually charged with making the final decisions. And that's something that probably deserves a whole session. But I wanted to add that to my lessons learned, that assessing fatigue as you're dealing with these things is actually a very important aspect. So that's it.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think the other folks here agree quite a bit with a lot of these assessments, as I could tell from the session. So now, well, first of all, I'd like to remind all of the guests, if you could mute your microphones for this section, that would be really useful, and then we'll open it up after these small presentations. But next, I would like Matthew to say a few words about his experience. I'm afraid I can't hear you, Matthew.
Okay, I had my mic muted. So I came to speak about an exhibition by Paul Rucker, who had initially planned to participate on the panel and talk about his experience exhibiting the work at York College. And the exhibition is called Rewind, and it deals with the history of racial violence in the United States. And the exhibition was named Exhibition of the Year by Baltimore Magazine when it was exhibited there, and it also received praise when it was shown at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And we brought it, I worked with him to bring it to York College, ran it through all of the procedures that you have to do to get something included in our annual cultural series. So just supply images and a description, and it goes through committee, and the provost signs off on it. But right a couple of weeks before the show was to begin, a controversy arose when some colleagues were concerned about the images being used to represent the show, thought it was going to create too much controversy. There was some. It was partly motivated by the colleagues who raised this objection had tried to do a program in their theater department that touched on some of the same themes, and that was removed from the cultural series. So there was also a little bit of, hey, how come you get to do something we didn't get to do? And so they got this, started to stir this up. And just as that happened, that weekend, so this began let's say August 8th or 9th, and then that weekend was the violence in Charlottesville. And by Monday, the conversation was all about canceling the show. And so I mainly talked about navigating that, working with senior administration on how we were going to proceed with the exhibition, if at all, which I, fought very hard to make sure that the show went on and that it ran for the full duration that we had promised the artist. Some restrictions were placed on who could attend. You either had to have identification from the college, meaning you were either a student or an employee, or you had to have a personal invitation from me. And that was an awesome loophole that I exploited to the full extent and made sure everybody in town was able to see the show. And it turned out to be probably, well, yes, without question, I should say, the best attended exhibition we've had on campus since I've been there, because it generated so much interest. And it was a very powerful exhibition. And it was, the concerns that had been raised was that we might bring some of the violence that we saw in Charlottesville to our campus. And that was part of it. But what I talked about in my talk was that I think what really motivated these concerns was more of a sensitivity to our outspoken alumni and to our board members, and to just the general uneasiness in the community on the subject of race. I think that motivated a lot of the actions that we were operating out of fear. And so some of the lessons, I think the institution learned some lessons, and a large one is just to have a plan in place, some kind of procedure in place for dealing with controversy, to have lines of to determine whose responsibility it is to address these things. I mean, we have our Office of Communications, but what we saw was, with the reaction the college had to this controversy, is that different people were saying different things and they didn't really line up. So, I mean, I think the college may have learned that lesson. Personally, bouncing off of some of the things that Saralyn was just talking about, I think it's really important that you keep pushing. This kind of kicked the door open to have this conversation, and it was a conversation that we'd been asked not to really have. And since then, we've been having it a lot, in different ways. We've had speakers who've come. The last exhibition I had talked about a lot of the same things. There was absolutely no controversy around it. It did deal with it differently, but some of the imagery was pretty provocative, and there were nothing but praise. I mean, one thing I think we learned about our community from the Paul Rucker show is that the community can handle it. There's nothing to fear. It's an exhibition. It provokes discussion. We shouldn't run away from those discussions. We should embrace them and have them. So I think that is largely the lesson that I learned, or we learned. But anyway, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it seems like there are a lot of lessons to be learned, not just by all of you, but also, what part does the individual have in the institution? What kind of role does the community have for the institution? And how should the institution serve the community as well? So these are all really interesting questions. So Daniel, can you say a little bit about your experience?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess I'll just kind of, try to boil it down a little bit. I mean, it was much easier with images, so maybe kind of.
Yes, I do. Well, I'm actually hoping that you can send me a few of the images for when we put up this recording so that they can see it.
Yeah. So basically I was invited to have a solo exhibition at a college in upstate New York at the Westchester Community College in the fall of 2018, last year, right before the midterm elections. And I proposed a show called, or an exhibition called Going Public, which featured 3 ongoing projects of mine, one being Get Lost, the second the project called Redistricting, about gerrymandering, and the project Recollections, which is the project that caused all the controversy. So this exhibition was great. It was originally scheduled to be from, I believe, September 10th, 2018 to October 19th. And I was going through
relax. Still probably a little out. My goal is
Excuse me, would mind muting your microphones? Great, thank you. Sorry, Daniel.
No worries. So like part of the exhibition was there was a lot of public programming and student engagement built into the exhibition. So I was teaching a class for a week, helped initiate a voter registration day panel. There was also an artist talk that was also built into the exhibition, which is part of my practice and was also a very important part of the exhibition. But one of the artworks that caused all the controversy from the Recollections project was an artwork called Recollections False Flag. And so the Recollections project is based on where I'm collecting and appropriating historical presidential campaign material and kind of revisioning it and altering it, and then reinserting it back into public space, virtual space, and institution space. And through my research of this project, I came across a Abraham Lincoln campaign flag from 1863. And so I'm going to try to draw this picture out for you. But so it was an American flag. But at the time in 1863, there was only 35 states in the Union. And so Lincoln had just signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so he arranged himself, Lincoln as a designer and artist, he arranged the 35 stars in the flag to spell the word free as an advertisement to the newly freed slaves for his second term in 1864. And so my revisioning of this flag was, obviously we have 50 stars on the flag now. I rearranged them to spell the word fake, obviously a reference to our current president, who claims to have invented the word fake, and also to false flag operations. And so leading up to my artist talk around October 17th, I was contacted by the gallery director from the school saying that there had been some pushback on the exhibition, but the school did not tell her what the pushback was about. So they left us hanging. And so obviously, the nerves start to build up. Then 2 days before the talk, I get a call from the gallery director again. She's saying there's a group of student veterans on campus that were very offended by the false flag artwork, and that they had been in conversation with the school's principal, or the president, I'm sorry. And they were offended. They couldn't understand why I was able to exhibit this artwork at the school, and that they wanted a space inside of the exhibition to voice their opinions about it, which I was okay with. That was kind of part of the exhibition, the project. So we kind of made a space in the exhibition for the veterans to kind of voice their opinions. It ended up being kind of like Post-it notes, but you could imagine where that went. There was a lot of, different sides conflicting and curse words, and it was just kind of a hot mess. And then, so leading up to that artist talk, most stressful day of my life. And so there was a large group of student veterans, local veterans, and, kind of gave my talk. We talked about the artwork, and they were able to voice their opinions. And I tried to explain the artwork, the First Amendment. But, I also learned a lot from that, which was good. But after the artist talk, the gallery director pulled me inside and said that one of the school's funders had approached her and said that she wasn't upset with me, the artist, that she was upset with her, the gallery director, and that if she did not have an exhibition in the next semester showing the other side, that she would be pulling her funding from the student scholarship. So that was shocking to hear, the gallery director being threatened by a funder. And then so 3 days after that, the gallery director let me know that they wanted to, I forgot to say that the exhibition had been extended at that point to November 17th. And, excuse me. And then so also with that extension, the gallery director was very excited that my exhibition would be up during the president's fundraising forum event, which was taking place on November 11th. And the gallery reception from that fundraising event would be inside of the exhibition. And that fundraising event was being moderated by Brian Lair. There were news correspondents from CNN, Fox News. So it would have been good exposure for the exhibition. So then back to 3 days after my talk, they want the exhibition shut down. I didn't really say anything because I've never been told I need to shut an exhibition down. It's kind of destabilizing. And long story short, I had to contact a lawyer, kind of explaining the whole run of events. and he said it was a First Amendment violation to shut down the exhibition. And so we kind of went to the press to kind of get it out that the school was shutting down the exhibition due to threat of losing funding. And yeah, so they shut down the exhibition a week early to completely, so that reception would not take place in the exhibition. Lessons learned. I would say as an artist, so that was one of the things the veterans said in the talk, was that there was not any didactic information near the artwork to kind of explain what the flag was about. So that's on me as an artist. You know, you kind of always want it to be a very clean looking installation, and try to avoid, you know, wall labels. But in this context, it was obviously an issue. So that's something I would do different, make sure there was clearly some sort of artist statement explaining the work. What else? I think, trying to open up some sort of dialogue with the veterans and the school's administration would be key. But I think, you know, the school just holding back that like what the veterans were saying initially. So it seemed like they didn't know how to handle it. So yeah, I think that was a real big missed opportunity to kind of establish some sort of connection, to work together. I mean, I know Saralyn kind of had the flip experience where they worked with the veterans in their instance. So I think that was a missed opportunity. But I think the other thing I said was that academic art museums and galleries strengthen and clarify their relationship, because I feel like in this instance, it was clearly like two different worlds operating. Mm-hmm. And once there was a fissure, you know, it was like two conflicting sides. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. Well, yeah, this is bringing me back to this session, which I found absolutely fascinating. And it's really wonderful to hear from Saralyn and from Matthew how they really had to struggle with their role and what is often the idea that others don't want you to be bold, don't want you to really push the envelope. And I think that's a big thing in especially contemporary art, which, you know, Daniel, as you know, may be misconstrued. But there's also, it seems, in a lot of these cases, a sort of misunderstanding of history. I mean, especially in your case, Matthew, and in your case, Daniel, these were based on very clear historical precedents, some of these works, some of the works by Paul Rucker, including the KKK robe from possibly York County, and with you, Daniel, especially this flag. I mean, there's a clear historical precedent that is being commented on that was not understood. But there's also a certain fear of self-censorship, often either by someone at the museum or at a larger part of the institution, or by the community itself. So it's really interesting how there are different ideas of how to clarify these things and how to have a dialogue and a conversation. And Saralyn, I remember you showing lots of pictures of sort of this discussion that happened. So I guess in the interest of opening up this discussion, I'd also like to see what all of the listeners here think, what kind of questions they have. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can all turn your video on if you like, and your audio. And if you just, wave so everyone can see you and ask your questions, please feel free to do so. One, two, three, four. Okay, we have 12 people that are listening in right now. I think the other thing that I wanted to ask about was money. How much power does money have on these decisions, and at what level? I feel like it's at the larger institutional level that people get very concerned about things like donors, as you said, Daniel. Did anyone else see that as one of the main problems, just the fear of losing that kind of funding?
Oh, Saralyn, your mic's off.
I can't hear you.
Here I am.
Oh, wonderful.
There you go.
You know, I'm just saying this in all honesty, this never rose to the most important level of the conversation. This was overtly financial limitations weren't at the top of it. What I will say is that we did lose a few donors. Many of them are back.
Oh, wonderful.
And I would, well, many. So we lost a few. I would say most of them are back. Maybe that's the correct way to say it. But even the situation is not a fixed object. So I think that thinking through these controversies as a process, you know, continuing, and I just keep going back to the relationship. So my first question has to be not how much money was at stake here, but how can I enter into a dialogue with this person who was offended or felt misled or felt perhaps that our timing was wrong? What's my role in continuing that relationship? So I'm just going to cant your question a little bit to say, I think it's very important not to stop the dialogue with, oh, this many people were angry, this many people were happy, but rather one of the new roles of, I think, curators and staff members at museums is to be very skilled, as expert in continuing dialogues as we are in other methods of artistic. Mm-hmm. So if we want to continue to do bold things, we have to have a whole palette of ways in which we are going to engage with our donors and our staff. So I'll just say it that way.
Well, actually, my question for you is, could you say a little bit about how that dialogue happened for you?
Post-event?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I guess somewhat during the event and post the event. You talked a little bit about it at the session, but I kind of want to see from all of you what dialogues happened and what could have happened. What would be useful?
Well, one thing, and I had written this down when either Daniel or Matthew were talking, I think that the trust building has to occur ahead of the event, so that when you get to it, you've got some, as much as possible. You can't always do that with a visiting artist, but if the more that you can build trust with site visits to upper administration, more information coming out, I think trust is a byproduct of building relationships before there is a problem or before there is a celebration, in both ways, because then they're not dependent on it being either. And when all of the critique goes away and all of the outsiders go away, there you are with your institution, your staff and your artists and your administration. And do they still trust you? So I think trust is a main thing. I'm very persistent, but I also think it's never over. That you don't write someone off. Maybe they don't want to talk to you for a year, you're back in 3. And maybe it's the next decade. But that they're always, once you've had that encounter, so I would say longevity of conversation, building trust all the way along, those are hallmarks of a productive conversation.
And what about the conversations that you had also with the community? So you became involved?
Okay. So our community was rallying in almost every way behind us, questioning us. And I should also say that the ability to formulate a good question that's not an aggressive question, but a real question is very helpful in these situations. That's not a question that's leading toward your conclusion, but is a sincere question is where the real learning takes place. So we're talking about the veteran group, and I think that I actually did not participate in this, but there was a small subset of my staff that met with the student veterans group leadership. And I think the reason that we were able to progress and have the ongoing relationship and continue that conversation is around that table. We were not trying to convince each other. As I understand that conversation, it was about, I really want to understand what bothers you. Mm-hmm. And conversely, rather than taking a noble position that doesn't have enough understanding behind it.
Right.
So,
yeah, it seems to be a lot of misunderstanding. Yes.
So I would say our community is used to us being question posers, and more we think of ourselves that way, reframing questions, thinking about questions, presenting questions. So the community rallied. We have a lot of new work to do.
Mm-hmm. Of course, it's a process. So what about you, Matthew? Do you think that there was a way the dialogue could have been done better, or was there a sense of dialogue that you think really worked well?
Well, one thing, listening to Saralyn, I think she's absolutely right about the importance of the building of the trust and maintaining the trust, and that's definitely something that was strained during my experience. But I think it cuts both ways. I think when we talk about this, it seems like the responsibility is completely on the part of the artist and the exhibition space to gain the trust of administration and the community. But I think the community and the administration need to demonstrate trust of the exhibition space and the artists as well. I mean, if we have a record of putting on strong exhibitions, and then we bring an artist whose flag causes some concern, we don't run from that artist. I think we have an obligation to stand up for that artist. I think the institution has an obligation to stand by the decisions that they've made. So I absolutely agree. I think it's important that we have open dialogue when a controversy arises. I think the more transparency, the better. But I'm a little frustrated just thinking about the experience that Daniel went through. His piece is, in my mind, so easily defended, and I don't understand an institution not doing that and running cowardly away from a situation like that. It's very frustrating to me. And I mean, honestly, I felt the same way about Paul's show. And I think there's operating out of fear and, I mean, the money issue that you raised, what are donors going to think? That never came up in my situation, but it does. The thing about threats to your financial situation, the implicit threat, you don't need an explicit threat. We know that we need donors. And the concern that something might upset donors, I think there's an implicit threat there that your funding is in question. I really worry about, I mean, I can't believe the audacity of somebody saying I'm going to pull funding from this lecture series because of how you've handled this. I think that's the thing that college should be spending their time thinking about. How do we build relationships with donors that don't think it's in their right to then start dictating content in this way? So I don't know. I worry about this issue of censorship and the self-censorship, knowing that I've upset people, I better not do that again. That artist there is interesting to me, but I'd better not invite them because their work might not be understood correctly. We might have alumni complaining, and once you start operating out of a fear of what might happen, I think that's a really dangerous place to be. And so I guess I'm thinking out loud here, but I think that institutions should have enough confidence in their history, in their record, to stand up strong in the face of controversy and stand by their employees and the artists that their employees have invited. And yes, create spaces for dialogue, but some of the things that Daniel mentioned, I just find, and I know this goes on, it's just not usual. It's rare that someone is that obvious about it, that they would turn, and it's usually a little more subtle than that. But I did have a similar situation I mentioned in my talk where one of my early experiences was a board member telling me that they did not like the work that I was doing. And eventually I teased it out of this board member that she didn't like, quote unquote, black art. And that was not the most politically correct thing to say. And I spoke with the then president, who's not our college president now, and I mentioned that I was a little concerned about this board member wanting to exert influence. And his response is like, it's troubling, but it was in the moment, I was momentarily relieved. The response was, well, she doesn't have enough money to wield that kind of influence. So had she had that kind of money, perhaps I would have had a committee overseeing my decisions the next year. But she didn't have enough money to do that. And anyway, that is a scary thought, that kind of influence is available to certain donors.
Yeah, and I think that's coming up more and more. I mean, we've seen a lot of pushback against folks like the Sackler family who give donations to so many museums. And I think that the floodgates are opening to some degree in terms of responsibility and the responsibility of money. But we also see a lot of artists and a lot of other folks really being bold, speaking out about these things. And it really seems like if you're going to speak out about any kind of, especially social conflict, the arts is really kind of meant for that. So sorry, not to take any time away from Daniel.
Yeah, do you mind? Can I ask Daniel just a quick question?
Yeah. Great.
I'm sorry, Cali, but I wanted to know, have you suffered as a result of involving a lawyer? Because that's something that you hear, once you do that institutions might punish you for having done that. And it's something that I've been wondering about.
Good question. Suffered as I'm missing exhibitions, or? Yeah,
perhaps, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think that would be hard to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of recent. It just closed in November, so just a few months ago. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you know what? I actually haven't even thought that would. I mean, I guess it's because I'm doing this other project right now that's kind of protesting the Whitney Museum. I thought I'd be getting blacklisted for that and not this other thing. So maybe just,
I love it.
It's my whole practice that could be damaging my career. I don't know. But yeah, I can't say just yet. But yeah, thanks for putting it on the radar. I hadn't thought about it.
No, I'm sorry. It's something that I think about, like, if you've been done wrong by an institution and then you challenge that institution, the implied threat is always that the next institution won't want to deal with you because you stuck up for yourself. And and I think it's important that artists stand up for themselves, but paving the way perhaps.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. I mean that all factored into me, like, going to the press was like, do I not say anything and just like walk away? But it was kind of like, if they're doing this to me, they're going to do this to the artist right behind me or the one behind her, or, and so I felt I needed to take a stand. I mean, it's my practice. This is my work. And I mean, I'm standing by it 100%. And so if there is some blacklisting, so be it, but this is the work that I'm making, and we all have civil rights, and we should all stand up for them, regardless if they're in a college art exhibition or on the street,
Oh, it's powerful. And I do tend to think that you're doing a disservice to the community if you're not showing them things that might be uncomfortable, that maybe they haven't thought of before. And I think especially, Matthew, we were talking about in Pennsylvania, where there might be a history of racial issues that people don't talk about. That is a service to the community to make this visible. And I think to start those dialogues, I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
There's one early point in the planning process that I would like to just mention in terms, because I feel like I learn more about this every year. There's a decision point when you engage when one or an institution engages in a project and you start communicating about it. And there's a decision point about how much you will hear, how much you will internalize and hear at that point before the decisions are all made. What kinds of advice are you taking? What kinds of advice do you respect? So something we talk about a lot when we're in communication mode is, are we communicating about the project in such a way that does not indicate we are asking for permission? So if you know that, so we think about that, are we actually saying, can it go here or here or here? Or are we actually saying, is it okay to do this? And I would like to think that we mostly are saying, we want to share this with you, but we're not asking your permission once we've gotten to that point. So that's so early. That's before everything, but I think that's an internal process of a staff. So I just wanted to get that out there as a kind of, you asked me about dialogue, and I think that that's a kind of hallmark to deciding on what vector you are going to be sharing the project.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of those sort of bigger ideas about how you want an institution to run, how you want a museum to run, your ideas about how you function as a person, are often sort of forgotten. They might be implicit, but they're not always spoken out loud. And I think, in a way, you all promote a certain sort of relationship between, artists, museums, and institutions, and a certain sense of advocacy for each other. And I think that's really important to consider, and for people who work together, especially, to realize where you lie on those sorts of issues. So, Daniel, I just wanted to ask you, or go back to this line of questioning. If you thought, how do you think the dialogue could have gone?
Well, I think initially, from the first, point of contact where they told the gallery director that there was some pushback, but they didn't tell her what it was. That was just so bizarre to not be transparent and not say who was offended or what they were offended with, and just so to kind of leave us in the dark. So I think, like I said before, it was obviously clear from the get-go, we're operating on two separate channels. So, yeah, and then a week later finding out that it is, there's a local, group of student veterans who were offended. I think it should have been initially right there at the first, warning sign. Hey, can we, maybe this is the gallery director, hey, maybe we should talk to the president. Can we talk to them? But it was clear, it was like there was a wall between the whole thing. And I literally didn't meet anyone from the administration until I was cleaning out that last early day. And it turned out to be like the provost was in the gallery and, you know, kind of introduced herself to me. And it was just so awkward. And it didn't really need to, like, it was just, it all boiled down to, you know, transparency and, you know, lines of communication. And it just wasn't there. And, like, I feel like a lot of it could have been avoided. So, I mean, me now going through this, I feel like I have a lot of new armor and kind of tools to kind of, especially kind of like hearing Saralyn and Matthew's kind of, you know, how they handled it. I feel much, as an artist, more prepared going forward and how I would do things differently. You know, maybe not next time I go and introduce myself to the administration or, you know, and say, hey, this is what we're doing, you know. But I also feel like it was a huge missed opportunity. Like after, you know, the artist talk, or even before the artist talk, the school put out something about freedom of speech, you know, but it was just kind of like, it's on the website. They put it next to the guest book at the entrance of the exhibition. Kind of like a disclaimer post-fact, but like at the talk, it could have been a great opportunity to talk about the First Amendment or, you know, so I feel like there was a lot of missed opportunities.
Great. Well, I have a great question coming in from someone.
Sure.
That kind of flows into that, and that is, they said, I would be curious to learn more about the ways your experiences are shaping their work for social action, or shaping your work for social action on the campus or in the practice. And this question is open to anyone. So how your work shapes your social action in general.
I mean, for me, I guess I'll jump in first. Yeah, I mean, I think I wasn't gonna say it was nice, but just the theme of the exhibition, like about going public, this idea of exposing institutions and structures of power and kind of bringing them to light in public. The fact that that happened with the exhibition was a weird, almost, it was a project in itself. Like, I mean, I saw it as the last work in the project, because, it was just so ironic that it was happening in the show at the school. And so, I mean, that was ironic, but I mean, for me, it just solidifies what I'm doing. And so next time you know, like I said, like once they said, you need to shut it down a week early, like there was hesitation in me and like, you know, uncertainty and not knowing how to handle it. Like that will not be there next time, you know, like, and so, yeah, I think it's just, I mean, the work was already questioning these structures of power, and kind of working within them and exposing them. So this just, you know, takes it to the next level. And just to see it, I mean, I guess also as an artist, I mean, I think Matthew and Saralyn are already in, you know, academia, and working there, but like, as an artist to kind of see it firsthand was very shocking. And so, yeah, so next time, just eyes wide open, for sure.
I think I would answer in somewhat a similar way as Daniel, in that I'm not doing, my experience hasn't changed what I'm doing. I was doing these kinds of exhibitions before, and I'm going to continue to do them. But I think it's left me a little bit better prepared and ready for what might come. I suppose, if anything, it has made me want to do this more, to push harder, and to really listen and try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening both on campus and in the community and the larger society about what is it that we need to be talking about, and what conversations are bubbling up to the surface, and if we don't deal with them, are going to explode, is kind of where I am always looking, when I'm interested in finding artists who are also doing that. And so if anything, it's just made my commitment that much stronger. And some of the lessons, something that Saralyn mentioned and then Daniel mentioned, an interest in doing this that I think is a really good idea is, well, one thing I really liked about what Saralyn said is we're not asking for permission. I think that's a really great posture to begin with, not in an antagonistic way, but this is a really powerful discussion that we're going to bring to campus. And we have this amazing artist who has a track record of strong work, award-winning, whatever the case might be, when you bring somebody to campus to establish this notion that this is a person who is to be trusted, who has a record of doing this kind of work. And when this show comes, implied in that message, we all need to stand strongly behind it. Because what I've seen is when the institution doesn't, like Daniel mentioned, there suddenly appears a statement in the exhibition, and then the messaging is coming from all over the place. It feels like somebody running around putting out fires, and that does not instill confidence. And it also that opening, that kind of weakness, gives the audience or the community a sense that there's openings to attack if you don't like what this exhibition represents. And whatever offended people about Daniel's work, who knows? Maybe the reason you never got as clear answer is that maybe it was like a mixture of things. Maybe half of it was sensitivity to anything critical of Donald Trump. And so they were upset because Donald Trump was being criticized. But you can't shut down an exhibition because somebody's being criticized, so you have to come up with a new reason. And I wonder if that reason evolved over time to become a stronger argument to shut it down. And anyway, I'm going to go off topic here, but I think we have a serious problem in our country with the use of the flag belonging to the military and not to the rest of us. That is I have a real objection to that idea, for whom it stands. It doesn't stand for one group. It stands for all of us. So anyway, I'm like I said, I'm getting off topic.
So Matthew, that's such a powerful statement that I hate to jump in, but I have to. Something that has been reconfirmed over and over to me has been the artist. We have to stay close to the artist. The artist has to be respected in these dialogues. And I also mean respected in the sense that the artist is often a great spokesperson. It's not that you have to be the only one speaking, but I think the closer we can be to the artist project, that's what I keep learning over and over, that if we detach these ideals always from the artist's work, we lose the contextual power. So that's what I've learned, that the artist, I want to be close to the artist.
Absolutely. Have you seen this this viral op-ed in a newspaper at Dickinson College that a student wrote?
Probably not.
Probably not. Well, yeah, that was very vague. So it's very provocatively titled. It was, "Should white boys be allowed to talk?" Or something to that effect. And it was a young woman it was a student of color who was just letting her frustrations be known that in every class, all of the discussions are dominated by white guys. And so this is what I'm getting at here, is that I do not like, yes, I am behind the scenes scheduling these putting these exhibitions together. I don't want to be the voice of them. Like to give a platform to artists of color, to women artists, for them to speak. And I think it is super important that they be given the opportunity to speak and to defend their work, and not have a muzzle on the artist and have the institution stand in for them and talk on their behalf. The institution really is going to benefit from taking a step back and saying, we think it's important to give a platform to this artist. Now listen to them and ask them questions. I think that's a win-win, honestly, because the artists can speak to their work, and the institution stands by the artist, but also, the artist takes full responsibility for their work. I think that's where I would like to see things.
Okay, so someone came in with a question. There are actually a couple of more questions that I've got over here. But one I think might play into this a little bit more. So this is someone who is admittedly playing devil's advocate, and asks what happens when you don't agree. For instance, if there's a campus student exhibition and one of the pieces on view is clearly in support of something like white supremacy, would you let that work stay in the exhibition?
Is that for me or for Saralyn?
It's actually for everyone. This is one of our guests that's listening in is asking this question.
I think one of the hard things, yes, I think this is a good devil's advocate question, because we do need to be consistent in, I was reading a piece in the New Yorker earlier today about the issue of defending someone like Harvey Weinstein, and how the lawyer who took that case has been shamed as a rape apologist. And that, so where the New Yorker was coming from was saying, you have to, everyone, no matter how unpopular, has to have a right to a defense, no matter what they've done. And so I think of that in terms of the artwork too. I guess we'll have to use the First Amendment as our guide in this. And if an argument can be made that something has stepped beyond First Amendment protection, then, that's a dialogue to be had. But my own personal politics should not be the determining factor.
So I love this question because it really hits us where we live. You have all your ideals and you try to set up the right process, and then sometimes this is not in the sense that you give up, but I think that it is on us to set up processes that somehow reinforce freedom of expression. And whatever those processes are, they often, I will say for me, they have often stepped on my personal sensibilities, but that has not allowed me to step away. I would say that happens annually. Something that I'm presenting is stepping on something that I hold dear. And I don't feel monolithic about what is right. Or virtuous. So I hope that I could stand by that. I think I would feel like I have to draw a line when it becomes hateful and dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have another question coming up unless Daniel, you want to say anything to that?
I mean, yeah, I don't know what I could add. I don't really curate, but I would just say, I think like Matthew's point, like it's the First Amendment. Like I think if it's not directly inciting violence or aggression, depending on the context of the work, you have to let the First Amendment, be the judge there.
Okay. So we have another question. Were there any conversations or measures taken in the planning stages to mitigate potential controversy? And Saralyn, you already spoke to this to some degree. Or to train staff and develop an action plan should controversy arise. So essentially what was done in terms of not just yourself, but the staff around you, and were there steps to sort of follow as this came up?
In my case, everything happened so quickly, and the decisions that were made were not, they were temporary decisions and not intended to be policy. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think once the exhibition left, the focus shifted to other things as far as the administration's concerned. So we did not create a permanent policy for dealing with controversy.
Okay.
So the one thing I will add is that we're thinking, and my communications person wants to do more with our crisis management planning, wants to do more as a result of this. And I'm fully on board with that. What was really good during that process, and this has happened before in the museum, is that when there is a process, you call people together, and we often did that. There would be a staff email going out. Everybody would meet on a certain floor. We would talk. We would communicate. So I think it has to do with, while there are plans and policies, it's more about how do you expect the unexpected, because every single controversy is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and yeah, we actually have a follow-up to that question. So if you're planning an exhibition that you think could be controversial, do you approach it differently than what you might consider a fairly friendly exhibition? Or non-controversial?
Honestly, I honestly don't really. It's partly, I mean, I think big difference between my situation and Saralyn's is I'm mostly a one-person operation. You know, I'm doing all of it. I'm designing the postcards. I'm packing up the show, hanging the show. Like every single aspect of running the exhibition falls on me. And I do have help periodically. I sometimes, when I'm overwhelmed or I have the project is too big, I have talented people in the community that I hire, and I have a couple students who will help with certain tasks. But for the most part, it's a one-person operation. And so I just don't have the time to change, like to have a completely different approach to every exhibition. I think I go into them knowing that there's a possibility that, you know, with Paul's show wasn't even the one I was thinking was going to cause the trouble.
Exactly.
I thought it was the one after that. And, you know, the one after that, the Kate Kretz, who was actually in the audience at the CAA, her show was pretty damn provocative. But I think people had provocation exhaustion. They didn't want to be provoked. They're kind of like, let's, you know, I don't know. I can't presume to know what people were thinking, but I wonder if seeing how much extra attention that we gave Paul's show. I mean, it was in a lot of ways that was a good thing. Like I don't like how we handled it, but a lot of great conversations came of it, brought a lot of attention to the show. And I think in some ways there was a desire not to do that again with Kate's show. And Kate's show was incredibly timely. I mean, it was talking about all of the societal ills that lead to mass shootings, and right in the middle of that show, the Parkland shooting happened. And there was a lot of really provocative imagery, more so in a lot of ways, because some of it was sexually explicit, and that usually is going to get people upset. But I actually received very little pushback on that show, and it was right on the heels of Paul's.
So yes, they take much more time, in my view, and I wish I were saying the opposite. I'd love to say the opposite, but I don't, and because I do think suddenly everyone is focused on how to manage this situation. And so the one thing I would say is, wouldn't it be something if we spent that much energy and focus and mixing what we did practically and idealistically on every single project we did, even the ones that are more comfortable? Wouldn't that be a thing? To have that kind of, so I always come out of these situations kind of reflecting on that and admitting that my whole life has been about that, and then thinking, wow, what would our place be if we were all so on it all the time?
Controversy energy, it seems.
Well, or just dedication to it. Dedication to having artists speak, doing the right thing, putting the right signs up, meeting people where they are, all that stuff.
Callie, I think you actually touched on something, though. I think people love it. They love the controversy. You know?
Well, people, I think
that's
people
I think part
like to think
yeah.
and to realize things that they hadn't realized before. And this is really the space for epiphanies like this.
Yeah.
So I
also think we just
is very valuable.
Yeah, people they also love to be offended. They love to get people riled up. I mean, I think the reason not to worry and prepare for every single controversy is they're going to come. Like if we did boring things, eventually somebody's going to find something to get pissed off about and start a controversy because we like that energy. I don't know. I'm being a little bit flip here, but I do think it happens. I see it. The things that become controversial sometimes in an absence of real controversy is absurd. We do like to stir things up a little bit. I feel like that's my role at the college, is to provide that as often as I can. And I love artists like Daniel who do that. And do you see that, Saralyn? Is it like that? I mean, you're on a big campus, so there's lots of things going on. But there's, I don't know, people like a little bit of controversy. I don't know.
Yes, I don't know if that extends to the people inside.
Yeah. But I wonder if that's...
I think we all like to feel we are doing something important. And when controversy, and that we are contributing to society. So whatever that question was about how does it affect your social practice, you just feel reconfirmed. Oh, I must be doing something important here. And so I don't know. I don't know that. I'm not enough of a psychologist to answer that question.
Yeah.
But I do after many years in this field, I do know that the reason we stay in it is because we know it's important. And it's flashpoints like this that kind of remind us. And maybe it's not the flashpoint that is the thing itself, but it's the flashpoint where you get to decide where you stand. And you have to. And you have to decide at what point you will draw your line, at what point you will argue, at what point you will continue, at what point will you put who at risk. So that's a much longer answer to your question, but I don't know if people love it. I just think that the art itself, that's part of what it does.
Yeah, maybe I chose the wrong word. I think people love a little bit of drama, and that becomes a part of what happens in these situations. But the controversy, I don't mean to diminish it, because like you said, it truly is, it's bigger than that. You know, the reason these things erupt is because we're touching on these important parts of our culture. How do we revere the flag? What are we willing to confront about our history? And there is this anxiety that if you lose ground on that issue, you know, all is lost. And so those who really don't want our history of racial violence talked about find, you know, oh God, pretty soon they're going to be talking about reparations. Or if this is a way that is acceptable to talk about the flag, the flag becomes a way of controlling people. And so if anybody can make a statement using the flag, and challenge, what it stands for, then maybe my position has diminished a little bit. My power has diminished. So I do think you're right. I mean, I think it is serious, but I also think there can be a little bit of a sideshow too, with people running around and feeding off that energy. And sometimes that's a whole other component to these controversies, is there's a little bit of absurdity to it too, that happens. And anyway, I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. Speak, Daniel.
I mean, I don't know what to say about that. What was the question?
Oh yeah. No, you know what? It
originally
wasn't even a question. Callie said something, and I spun off of it.
Oh, okay.
Well, we were talking about planning an exhibition that might be controversial.
Oh,
but,
right. Yeah.
You're strayed pretty far from that at this point.
No, I mean, I feel like, that's, now I remember. But I think that during the panel, that was one of my points of what I learned was like, I mean, I had if there was a piece that would cause controversy, it would be the flag. So like, I knew that there was a chance for something. The gallery director did not seem too shaken up, or no flags went up. But now moving forward, if I show that again, I'm definitely going to talk to the institution and say, hey, what are we going to do if something happens? And so, for sure, I think that conversation should be had before the show opens. So you're not running around, like Matthew said, the institution putting fires out, post fact. So I think that's critical. Like, have a battle plan going in, and if it's not the artist that brings it up, then I think the directors or whoever's running the show should. But I'm definitely doing it next time.
I mean, one thing, and I think I spoke about this, so I'll try to be really brief. One, because I haven't always been in embedded institutions like universities. I have been in a much more upstart, rousty place. And it is very different to be inside a university. And what I have had to clarify over the last 10 years is, what is my domain to be vigilant about? And how far does that extend? And I would submit that that's also part of the artist's question, what the artist has to ask. What is my domain? What is it my role to do? And so in my situation, I was always asking myself, okay, I can speak for the museum. That's my domain. I can try to influence other things, but the whole university is not my domain in terms of authority. So it is useful for me, even as the ideals and purposes hold their sway, that I understand the power that I do and do not have.
Mm-hmm.
So
it seemed like you all gained sort of an awareness of the bigger picture about how different folks in different situations and different I guess parts of the situation might see things differently, and these big picture issues that people can feel very strongly about. Things like the flags, things like racism, things like history and the possible misunderstanding of certain things like that, the role of communication. So I feel like this has been a very fruitful conversation. It has been a little bit over an hour, but I realized that I had some tech problems on my side. But we don't have any questions left. So unless any of you want to say anything else, I'd like to close down our conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to say first?
I'm one tiny little thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question that should keep coming back in the face of controversy is, what are we afraid of? And if what we're afraid of is conversation, then let's talk. If we're afraid of how people are going to react, let's talk to them specifically. But by hiding and trying to run from it, it only makes things worse. So I think that should be, for me, that's a guiding question going forward. What are we afraid of? And then go right at it, and don't run away from it, because if we address it, I think we can grow. But if we run from it, then we just have these festering problems.
I think that's some good general overall advice. So I want to thank you all for being here. Saralyn Reece Hardy, Daniel Bejar, and Matthew Clay-Robison. I'm hoping to have this recorded. Well, it is being recorded. And we should have it up on our website. I invite all of you to send me any resources related to this that you might have that we can also put on the website for all of our listeners.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
I
you
hope
so
you have
much.
a good rest of the afternoon.
You too.
All right.
Great to see you.
Great to see you
everybody.
too. Bye,
See you
everyone.
later.
Bye.